Sign it. Darling, my mother whispered, pushing the pen into my hand. It's for the family. Logan has a future. Well, you can survive prison. The investor is outside, my father snapped, refusing to look me in the eye. We don't have time for your theatrics. Just do it, Rachel, Logan hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. Don't be selfish. Be useful for once. I looked down at the paper. The confession letter admitting to the $50 million he embezzled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I signed. Logan snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry, a triumphant grin breaking through his panic. Finally, I just looked at him. The brother who stole my identity was sending me to jail to save himself. Before I tell you whose name I actually signed on that dotted line, and what happened the second the ink dried, drop a comment below and tell me. Have you ever been the fixer for a family that broke you? I want to know your story. My name is Rachel, and I am 29 years old. For as long as I can remember, my family has operated on a single, brutal law of physics. Logan is the sun, and I am the shadow. The sun burns bright, consumes fuel, and demands worship. The shadow exists only to cool the ground he walks on. I sat there, watching my mother fold the confession letter with delicate, reverent hands, as if it were a holy scripture instead of a death warrant for my future. It reminded me of the lecture she gave me when I was 12, the first time Logan stole money from her purse and blamed me. You have to understand your place, Rachel, she had said, brushing my hair while I cried. Your brother is destined for greatness. He carries the family name. You are the support beams. Nobody sees the beams, darling, but if they break, the house falls. Your only job is to bear the weight so he can shine. It's a noble sacrifice. That was the cannibal's logic my parents lived by. They didn't think they were evil. They genuinely believed that consuming my life to fuel Logan's was the natural order of things. To them, I was a spare part, a biological backup drive to be wiped whenever the primary system crashed. They thought I was broken, unstable. My father liked to tell his golf buddies. Rachel has episodes, my mother would whisper to the neighbors. It was the perfect cover. While they painted me as the fragile, incompetent daughter who couldn't hold down a job, I was building an empire in the dark. They didn't know about the night trading. They didn't know that the online gaming addiction they mocked was actually me managing a diversified portfolio of high-risk derivatives under 3 different shell corporations. They saw a girl staring at a screen. They didn't see the algorithm I wrote that predicted the lithium shortage 6 months before the market crashed. I wasn't unstable. I was invisible. And invisibility is a superpower if you know how to use it. While Logan was busy buying sports cars he couldn't drive and funding startups that didn't exist, I was buying their debt. Every time the company needed a bridge loan, every time they issued junk bonds to cover a quarterly loss, my entities were there, quietly swallowing the paper. I owned their mistakes. I owned their desperation. And as of this morning, I owned their leverage. My father tapped the table, snapping me back to the freezing dining room. This solves everything, he muttered, more to himself than to me. The investor will see we've handled the internal accounting error. Logan steps up as CEO. We look strong. And Grandma? I asked, my voice flat. She stays comfortable, Logan said, checking his reflection in the window. As long as you stick to the script, you go to the DA tomorrow, surrender yourself, and we keep paying the nursing home bills. You wobble, and we pull the plug. Simple. They thought that was their ace. They thought my love for the only person who had ever been kind to me was a weakness they could exploit. They didn't know I had bought the nursing home's mortgage note at 8 o'clock this morning. I looked at Logan, preening in his suit, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a coronation. He had no idea that the throne he was about to sit on was built on a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. I need one thing, I said, wiping the last fake tear from my cheek. If I'm going to prison for you, I want to see it. I want to see you become the king. Logan stopped pacing. He looked at me, suspicion warring with his massive ego. What? Sign the CEO acceptance papers, I said. Right now, before the investor walks in. I want to know the company is actually yours before I throw my life away for it. You really are pathetic, Logan scoffed, a cruel smirk twisting his face. But I saw the glint in his eyes. He didn't hate the idea. He loved it. He had been waiting to sign those papers for 5 years. Call it insurance, I said, forcing my voice to tremble just enough to sell the performance. If I'm taking the fall for $50 million, I want to know who I'm saving. I want to see the crown on your head, Logan. I want to know the family legacy is secure before they take me away. My mother sighed, the sound sharp with impatience. She looked at my father, who was pacing by the window, watching the snow pile up against the glass. Let her have this, Dennis, she said, waving a hand at me like I was a fly she couldn't quite swat. It's sentimental nonsense. But if it gets her to shut up and behave when the investor walks in, just do it. It's her last request before, well, you know, before prison. She couldn't even say the word. Dennis checked his watch again. Fine. Whatever. We have 5 minutes. Sign the damn papers, Logan. Make it official. Then get her out of sight. Logan didn't need to be told twice. He practically lunged for his briefcase, pulling out the leather-bound corporate binder. This was his moment. The moment he had bullied, stolen, and lied to achieve. He laid the document on the table, right next to my confession letter. Appointment of Chief Executive Officer. Full authority. Full liability. He uncapped his fountain pen, a Mont Blanc. I knew for a fact he had charged to the company expense account, and flourished his signature on the bottom line. The scratching of the nib sounded loud in the quiet room. He blew on the ink, then held it up for me to see, grinning like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. Happy now? He sneered. It's done. I'm the king, and you're nothing but the scapegoat. I looked at the wet ink. I looked at the date. He thought he was signing a promotion. He didn't know he was signing a confession of his own. I stopped crying, instantly. The tears simply evaporated, replaced by a cold, dry, calm. I sat up straighter, the slump in my shoulders disappearing. Yes, I said. And my voice was different now, steady, flat, lethal. I'm happy. I reached under my chair and pulled out a second folder. A thick, black portfolio that had been taped to the underside of the seat. Logan frowned, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. What is that? That, I said, standing up, is the rest of the paperwork. The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, demanding sound that cut through the silence like a knife. My father jumped as if he'd been electrocuted. He's here, he gasped, his face draining of color. The investor. He's early. Panic detonated in the room. My mother scrambled up, smoothing her dress with frantic, trembling hands. Rachel, get to the kitchen, she hissed, pointing a shaking finger toward the service door. Now. Don't make a sound. We'll tell him you're handled. Logan was already buttoning his jacket, trying to compose his face into a mask of executive competence, though the sweat on his brow betrayed him. Go, he barked at me. If he sees you, the deal is dead. I didn't move toward the kitchen. I walked toward the front door. What are you doing? Dennis shouted, his voice cracking. Get away from there. You'll ruin everything. I reached the heavy oak door. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouette of the figure standing outside in the snow. My personal attorney, Victor, holding the files I hadn't brought in with me. But they didn't know that. They thought it was their salvation standing on the porch. I placed my hand on the deadbolt. Rachel, no! Teresa shrieked, lunging forward. I turned the lock. Clack. Then the secondary bolt. Thud. I turned around and leaned back against the wood, crossing my arms. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the wind howling outside and the ragged breathing of 3 people who were just beginning to realize that the script had changed. Open that door, Logan said, his voice low and dangerous. That is a $15 billion valuation standing in the cold. No, I said. It's just a lawyer. I walked back to the table, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood. I picked up the black portfolio I had pulled from under my chair and let it drop onto the mahogany. It hit with a heavy, solid slam that rattled the silverware. You're waiting for the strategic investor? I asked, my voice calm, almost bored. You're waiting for the shadow lender who bought your bridge loans when the banks turned you down? The one who holds the $2 billion lien on this company? I looked at my father, then my mother, and finally Logan. She isn't outside, I said. She's been sitting at this table for 3 hours. Dennis stared at the portfolio. He looked at me, then back at the black leather case. What are you talking about? Open it, I said. Logan reached out, his hand shaking uncontrollably now. He flipped the cover open. There were no stock certificates inside. No business plans. Just promissory notes. Stacks of them. Copies of wire transfers. Debt acquisition forms. And at the bottom of every single page, the signature of the purchasing entity. Shadow Corp Holdings, LLC. And right below that, in clear, unmistakable ink, authorized signatory, Rachel L. Vance. You? Logan whispered. The word came out like a choke. You're the lender? I own your debt, Logan, I said. I own the bridge loans. I own the equipment leases. And as of 8 a.m. this morning, I own the mortgage on the facility that is currently keeping Grandma alive. The color vanished from Teresa's face so fast, she looked like a corpse. You thought I was unstable, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. You thought I was playing video games in my room. I was building the cage you just walked into. So what? Logan's voice cracked, trying to find traction in the freefall. He slammed his hand on the table, trying to regain the dominance he had held 5 minutes ago. So you bought the debt. Big deal. That makes you a creditor, Rachel. Not the owner. I am the CEO. I run this company. I can renegotiate terms. I can drag you through court for 20 years. He pointed a shaking finger at the document he had just signed. This makes me untouchable. I have full executive control. My father nodded, latching onto the lifeline. He's right. You've made a strategic error, Rachel. You showed your hand too early. We can restructure. We can find new backing. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter watching the prey step directly onto the pressure plate. You really didn't read it, did you? I asked softly. I walked over to the table and flipped the CEO appointment document over. Not the one he signed, but the corresponding addendum in my portfolio. I spun it around so they could read the highlighted paragraph in the middle of page 4. Covenant 4B. I read aloud, my voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. Acceleration clause. Upon change of control. Logan squinted at the paper, sweat dripping onto his collar. What does that mean? It means, I said, leaning in, that the terms of the $2 billion loan were very specific. The debt was stable as long as Dennis remained CEO. But the moment a new CEO is appointed specifically, any family member with a history of financial negligence, the debt matures immediately. I tapped the wet ink of his signature. By signing that paper, Logan, you didn't just take the job, you pulled the trigger. The entire $2 billion principal is due. Right now. Tonight. We'll declare bankruptcy, Teresa snapped, her protective instinct kicking in. The company goes under. Fine. We start over. You get nothing. Wrong again, I said. I flipped to the next page. The personal guarantee. Because the company's credit rating was trash, the lender required a personal guarantee from the incoming executive officer. You signed that too, Logan. It was part of the standard package you were so eager to autograph. The air left the room. Logan looked down at his hands as if they didn't belong to him anymore. You tricked me, he whispered. You hid it. I didn't hide anything, I said. It was right there, in 12-point font, on page 4. You didn't read it, because you were too busy imagining your name on the door. You were too busy treating me like a prop in your coronation instead of the person holding the contract. This was the trap. It wasn't a hole I dug in the dark. It was a pit they dug themselves with their own arrogance. I just handed them the shovel. You don't just owe the company money, Logan, I said, my voice devoid of pity. You owe me $2 billion. Every car, every house, every offshore account you tried to hide, it's mine. You are personally, irrevocably bankrupt. I closed the portfolio with a snap. And since you can't pay, I said, I'll be taking your equity as collateral. All of it. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress. The motion was deliberate. A visual period at the end of a sentence. This meeting is adjourned, I said. My lawyers will be in touch regarding the asset liquidation timeline. I'd suggest you start packing. This house is on the list. I turned my back on them. It was the ultimate insult dismissing them as threats. I walked toward the elevator that led down to the garage, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. I reached for the call button. Then I heard the scrape of metal on stone. It wasn't a subtle sound. It was the screech of a heavy iron fire poker being dragged across the slate hearth. You aren't going anywhere. Logan's voice wasn't human, it was feral. He blocked the only exit, gripping a fire iron so tightly his knuckles whitened. The useless bully I grew up with was gone. Something desperate and unhinged stood in his place. Sit down, he snarled, pointing the poker at my chest. My mother screamed. Logan silenced her with a roar. She signs the debt over to me, he said. Nobody leaves until she does. I kept my voice steady. This is kidnapping, he laughed. Who's going to know? Blizzard outside. Power out. If you fall down the stairs, who questions it? The unstable sister? He advanced. I saw murder in his eyes. Dad, I said. Control your son. Dennis tried, but Logan smashed a vase and screamed. She owns everything, unless she signs it back. He was inches away when I revealed the trap. You should have read the briefing on the shadow investor. I tapped a phoenix brooch on my lapel. It's a 4K satellite uplink, live streaming to my lawyers, the board, and the district attorney. Logan froze. His face drained. I showed him my phone, the live feed of him holding the weapon. Kidnapping, assault, extortion, plus $50 million in fraud. The poker dropped. The monster evaporated. My parents begged for secrecy. I walked past Logan, unlocked the door, and left. Police were already coming up the mountain. He was arrested, denied bail, and ultimately sentenced to 15 years. My parents lost everything. The estate was seized. The company liquidated. I bought the assets and rebuilt the business without them. And now I sit beside my grandmother's hospital bed in Seattle, safe, warm, cared for, far from the house where I was treated like a shadow. If I could speak to the girl I once was, and to anyone who has ever been told they are invisible, I would say this. Being unseen is not a flaw, it is preparation. Do not shrink yourself to fit their story. Build your own. I am no longer the shadow. I am the sun,